They abandoned their poor mother in the village and thought they could escape the past. Years later, a single letter, a forgotten call, and a mother's endless love would confront them with the one thing they could never outrun: guilt, regret, and the truth that love never forgets. In a small, forgotten village, surrounded by tired farmland and fading memories, lived a woman named Grace Okafor. She wasn't famous, she wasn't rich, but her heart could feed 1,000 souls even when her stomach was empty. Grace was a widow. Her husband died when their 3 children, David, Sarah, and John, were still in primary school. Since that day, life had been a long road of pain and prayer. Every morning before the sun rose, she tied her old wrapper, picked up her rusty hoe, and walked barefoot to the farm. The path was long, the soil was hard, and her back screamed in pain. But she kept going, because hunger doesn't wait for mercy, and dreams don't grow unless you water them with sweat. Sometimes, when her hoe hit a stone, she'd pause, wipe her face, and whisper to herself, "One day, my children will not suffer like this. They'll eat from plates I never owned. They'll sleep on beds I never touched." That dream was the only thing stronger than her body. Their house was a small mud hut with holes in the roof. When it rained, she used broken buckets to catch the dripping water so her children wouldn't wake up soaked. They shared one old lantern, one mat, and one meal most nights: boiled cassava and salt. But Grace never complained. Instead, she would smile through the darkness and say, "Children, thank God. It could be worse," and they would all laugh, pretending not to hear their stomachs rumbling. As the years passed, her children grew, and so did her hope. David was clever, Sarah was beautiful and brave, and John, the youngest, had a voice that could melt hearts. Grace believed that education was their escape from poverty. So she sold her goats, borrowed from neighbors, even worked in other people's farms just to pay their school fees. When her hands cracked from farm work, she wrapped them in old cloth. When her legs swelled from walking miles, she soaked them in salt water and prayed silently. Her prayer was simple: "God, please help my children make it out of here, even if I never do." Years later, her prayer was answered. At least, that's what she thought. David got a scholarship to the city. Sarah found a job as a housemaid. John got admitted to the Polytechnic. That night, the whole village came to celebrate. Grace cooked rice, real rice, for the first time in years. She danced barefoot in the compound, tears running down her face. "My children will finally live the life I never had," she said, smiling through her tears. She hugged them, kissed their foreheads, and whispered, "Don't forget where you came from. The city is loud, but never let it silence your heart." They nodded, promised to come back for her, and left the next morning. Grace stood by the dusty road, waving until their bus became a dot on the horizon. The Harmattan wind brushed her wrapper, and she smiled, a proud, lonely smile. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months, then years. Her children rarely called. At first, she made excuses for them. "They're busy," she told the neighbors. Greater than city life is not easy, she told herself. But deep down, she knew they had forgotten. The phone calls stopped. The money never came. Her clothes grew older, her body weaker, yet her heart stayed the same, full of love. One evening, as the sun melted into the hills, Grace sat outside her hut, holding her old phone. The screen was cracked, the battery dying, but she still scrolled through their pictures. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Maybe they found a better life." That's all that matters. She smiled, though tears ran freely down her face. That's what mothers do. They love without reason, forgive without being asked, and wait even when no one is coming. When Grace's children left for the city, she believed her days of struggle were finally over. She waved until the dust from the old bus faded from sight, whispering prayers as it disappeared down the long red road. That night, she could not sleep. She kept smiling in the dark, telling herself, "My children will change this story. The city will bless them." And so, every sunrise, after that, carried new meaning. Each time she walked to her small farm, her tired steps felt lighter. Each grain of maize she planted came with a prayer for their success. She no longer farmed for food. She farmed for hope. Meanwhile, far away in the city, her children were learning a different kind of life. The city was loud, bright, and full of promises. Tall buildings touched the sky, and people walked fast as if chasing time itself. David, the eldest, quickly found work at a construction company. He wore shirts he could never afford in the village, and for the first time in his life, he felt important. Sarah got a job in a clothing store, surrounded by fancy fabrics and perfumes she'd never smelled before. And John, the youngest, balanced evening classes with small mechanic work to survive. Their first nights in the city were filled with excitement. They talked about how they would soon send money home, how they'd bring their mother to live with them one day. They even called her almost every evening, their voices bubbling with energy. Grace would laugh and say, "Don't forget to eat. Don't forget to pray." Her heart swelled with joy each time she heard their voices. But slowly, as weeks turned into months, things began to change. The city has a way of swallowing people. Bills piled up. Friends with sharp suits and smooth words told David that success came only when you cut off the past. He started avoiding calls from the village. Sarah, embarrassed by her poor background, stopped talking about her mother entirely. And John, caught between his siblings' influence and his own guilt, simply stayed silent. Grace called them every Sunday. At first, they answered with laughter. Then they began to respond with quick, distracted words, and one day the calls stopped going through. She would sit under the mango tree in front of her hut, holding her small phone tightly, waiting for it to ring. Sometimes it did, but the voice on the other end wasn't her children's. It was the network message saying, "Greater than, the number you have dialed is not reachable." Less than still, Grace smiled and said to her neighbor, "They must be busy. The city is not easy." But inside, her heart grew heavier each day. In the evenings, she would cook just enough for one person. She still set out 4 plates, one for each of her children and one for herself, just to remember how it used to be. The food would go cold, untouched, but she found comfort in the memory of laughter that once filled the room. When she walked to church, people greeted her with pity. Some said, "Mama Grace, your children must be rich by now." She nodded with a smile that hid her truth. She didn't want anyone to know that the children she raised with tears had forgotten her voice. Sometimes at night, she would look at the old photos they took before they left, torn, faded pictures of faces filled with dreams. She would run her finger across their smiles and whisper, "I hope they're eating well." Then she would close her eyes and pray again. "God, wherever they are, keep them safe. If they have forgotten me, remind them that I still love them." The tears that rolled down her cheeks were not from anger. They were tears of love, the kind that only a mother could understand. Because no matter how forgotten she felt, Grace never cursed them. She never said a word of bitterness. Her faith remained untouched, her heart still soft. In the city, life moved faster for her children. David was now driving his boss's car and talking like a man who had made it. Sarah wore perfume that filled a room before she entered. John had stopped sending letters. He didn't even know how to start one anymore. But deep inside, each of them was a quiet ache, a small voice they refused to hear. At night, when the city lights dimmed, they would think of their mother's laugh, her rough hands, the smell of cassava and smoke in her kitchen. Then they would blink those memories away, pretending not to feel anything. The city had given them everything they wanted, except peace. Back in the village, Grace's strength was fading. Her back hurt more, her eyesight blurred, but every evening she still walked to the same spot by the road where she last saw their bus. She would stand there watching every passing vehicle, hoping one might stop and bring them home. She would smile at strangers, just in case it was them. And when the sun disappeared behind the hills, she would whisper softly, "Maybe tomorrow." She believed it with all her heart, because love doesn't keep score, and mothers never stop believing. The rainy season had come again. Grace's roof leaked more than ever, but she didn't complain. Each drop that fell reminded her of the days her children were still under that roof, laughing, fighting, calling her Mama. Now, the house echoed with silence. She still kept their old room clean. Every week, she swept it, washed the sheets, and folded the clothes they left behind. It was her way of keeping them close, even if only in memory. Grace's neighbors often asked, "Mama Grace, have you heard from them?" And she always replied, with a smile that trembled, "Yes, they called last week." But the truth was different. Her phone had not rung in months. Sometimes she would walk to the small wooden bench under the mango tree and dial their numbers herself, one after another. Each time, the same hollow voice replied, "The number you have dialed is not reachable." She would sigh, wipe her hands on her wrapper, and whisper, "Maybe tomorrow." Tomorrow. That word had become her only friend. Far away in the city, life had taken full control of her children. David had moved into a shared apartment with friends. His days began with construction noise and ended with exhaustion. He sent money to no one. When guilt pinched him, he drowned it in laughter and beer. His friends teased him, saying, "Why send money to the village? That life is behind you now." And with time, he began to believe them. Sarah was doing better. She wore fine clothes, smiled often, and dated a man who promised to change her life. But whenever he asked about her family, she changed the topic. She was ashamed to admit her mother still lived in a leaking mud house, wearing the same faded dress every Sunday. John, the youngest, carried the heaviest heart. He often stared at his old phone, scrolling through Grace's saved messages. He wanted to call, he truly did, but each time he tried, his siblings' voices echoed in his mind. "You'll make her expect too much. Let her be." So he stayed silent, hoping that success would make up for the silence someday. But Grace never wanted their success. She only wanted their voices. Weeks turned into months. The seasons changed again, and Grace's small farm struggled to survive the harsh sun. She grew thinner, weaker, but she still worked the soil every day. When her body refused to continue, she would sit under the tree, staring at the horizon. She imagined her children driving down that road, their car stopping, their voices shouting, greater than, "Mama, we're home," but no car ever came. At night, loneliness filled her small house like smoke. She prayed longer, but even her prayers began to sound like whispers in an empty room. Still, She never cursed them. She only said, "God, please don't let them forget completely." Then one Sunday morning, something strange happened. Her phone, that silent, forgotten device, began to ring. Grace jumped from her mat, nearly tripping as she rushed to answer. Her hands trembled. "Hello," she said, her voice cracking. But it wasn't her children. It was the pastor's wife, asking if she could help clean the church before service. Grace forced a smile and said yes. That day, as she scrubbed the wooden benches, tears fell freely. She wasn't crying because of the hard work. She was crying because she realized how easily hope could play tricks on the heart. In the city, John finally decided to call. It was late evening, and the sound of rain outside reminded him of home. He pressed his mother's number and waited, but the line didn't connect. Her phone battery had died hours ago. That night, he couldn't sleep. He thought of her, sitting under the mango tree, waiting. And for the first time, guilt hit him so hard he couldn't breathe. He promised himself he would visit soon, after his next paycheck. But soon has a way of never coming when you keep choosing tomorrow. Back in the village, Grace fell ill. Her legs could no longer carry her to the farm. The churchwomen visited often, bringing her food and company. They prayed for her strength, but Grace only asked for one thing. Greater than, "If you ever see my children, tell them Mama still loves them each night." She whispered their names like a prayer. David, Sarah, John. She didn't ask for riches, only for one more conversation. One more, "Good morning, Mama." But her phone remained silent, lying beside her bed, like a sleeping bird that would never sing again. The city had swallowed Emily whole. Sarah was her real name, but she'd buried that name the day she decided to become someone else. In the world she now lived in, Sarah, daughter of a poor village farmer, didn't exist. She was Emily, elegant, polished, and untouchable. Her apartment glowed with soft yellow light, the kind that hides the cracks in the wall. She stood before her mirror, adjusting a necklace her boyfriend, Michael, had bought for her. It sparkled like the stars above the village she'd left behind, the same stars her mother still prayed under. Emily had learned to smile without showing too much emotion, to laugh politely, to say, "Oh, my parents are abroad," whenever anyone asked about her family. Each lie felt easier than the truth. The truth carried dust, hunger, and memories of a woman in tattered clothes waving goodbye by a muddy road. Michael was from a wealthy family, the kind that threw dinner parties just to celebrate a new flower vase. He loved Emily's beauty, her composure, and her mystery. He believed she was everything he'd been looking for, and Emily believed she could keep her lie hidden forever. That evening, they attended a grand dinner in the city's most expensive hotel. Crystal chandeliers, white roses, and the smell of imported wine filled the room. Emily smiled gracefully beside Michael, her gown flowing like water, her laughter blending perfectly with the wealthy crowd. To them, she belonged. But deep down, she knew she was only renting a place in their world. The night moved beautifully until a sound shattered her calm. A familiar voice calling her old name. Greater than Sarah? Sarah Nardi? Her heart froze. The name cut through the air like a blade. Emily turned slowly, her smile fading. There, standing near the buffet table, was Mrs. Ada, a woman from her home village, one of her mother's church friends. Ada's face lit up with surprise and innocence. "Greater than, oh my goodness, it's you!" Sarah, Mama Grace's daughter. Michael's eyes widened. The entire table turned. Emily's chest tightened as a cold wave of panic rushed through her. She forced a laugh and said, quickly, "I'm sorry, you must be mistaken." But Ada tilted her head, confusion clouding her face. Greater than, "No, you are Sarah, Mama Grace's daughter. How's your mother?" "It's been years." Silence fell over the table. Michael looked at her, waiting, uncertain. Emily's voice trembled. Greater than, "I think you have me confused with someone else." Her tone cracked like broken glass. The lie hung heavy in the air. The dinner resumed awkwardly. Michael didn't speak for the rest of the night. Emily smiled and nodded through conversations she couldn't hear. Inside, her stomach churned with shame. The moment they left the restaurant, Michael stopped by the car, looked at her, and said quietly, "Who was that woman?" Emily couldn't look at him. Her voice dropped. Greater than, "Just someone from a long time ago." He stared for a long time. "A long time ago, or a truth you've been hiding?" She tried to hold back tears, but they fell anyway, quietly, stubbornly. For the first time, she wished she could take all her lies, wrap them up, and bury them somewhere no one would ever find. That night, Emily sat alone by her window. The city lights blinked outside, glittering like 1,000 false stars. She finally understood what her mother meant when she used to say, "Not every light is from heaven. Some only shine to blind you." Her phone lay on the table, silent as ever. She scrolled through old messages. Her mother's last one read, "Greater than I love you, my daughter. No matter how far you go, my heart will follow you." Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the phone to her chest, whispering, "I'm sorry, Mama." For the first time in years, she didn't feel like Emily. She felt like Sarah again, the poor farmer's daughter who left love behind in search of light. Success came fast for Jason. Too fast. In just a few years, the same boy who once walked barefoot to school now rode through the city in a shiny black SUV. His suits were custom-made, his office had air conditioning, and people called him Sir. He had become everything he once dreamed of: powerful, respected, untouchable. But along the road to success, Jason lost something greater than money could ever buy: his humility. His mother, Grace, had once told him, "Son, no matter how high the wind lifts you, never forget the ground that raised you." But Jason laughed at those words now. He told himself that the ground she spoke of was too dirty for him. He had changed his number twice. To protect his privacy, he said. He stopped answering calls from old friends, and when his brother Mark tried to visit, he told security, "Tell him I'm in a meeting." When co-workers talked about helping the poor, Jason scoffed. "Greater than the poor stay poor because they're lazy," he said, without a hint of shame. The man who once begged for opportunity now looked down on those who reminded him of where he came from. At night, when the city grew quiet, Jason would sometimes hear his mother's voice echo in his head. "Remember, pride can feed your stomach, but never your soul." He'd pour himself another drink, open his balcony window, and drown the voice with music and laughter. He told himself he was happy. But happiness built on pride is like a mansion on sand, beautiful, but waiting to fall. One Monday morning, Jason arrived at work to find whispers floating through the office halls. Eyes followed him, but no one spoke. When he entered his glass office, two men in black suits were waiting. On the table before them, a folder stamped Fraud investigation. Mr. Jason Okoro, one of them said coldly, you're under internal review for funds mismanagement. Jason's confidence shattered. His throat dried as he tried to explain. Greater than, there must be some mistake. But there wasn't. Emails, bank records, and fake signatures all traced back to his name. It didn't matter that his assistant set him up. The company needed someone to blame. And Jason's name was now dirt. Within hours, his access cards were deactivated. His colleagues avoided eye contact. The same people who once called him Sir now whispered behind his back. By evening, Jason was standing on the street outside the office, holding a box of his belongings, a broken frame, a few files, and a pen engraved with his initials. The rain started to fall, washing away the dust on his shoes, but not the shame on his heart. He called a few friends, hoping someone would offer help. None picked up. He tried his girlfriend. She blocked his number. His driver quit the next morning. And for the first time in years, the mighty Jason sat alone in his apartment, staring at the ceiling, the silence so loud it echoed. He hadn't spoken to his mother in nearly 2 years. He didn't even know if she was still alive. He thought of calling, but pride held his fingers still. His mind whispered, what will she think of me now? Days turned into weeks. Bills piled up. The expensive lifestyle that once made him feel powerful now felt like a trap. One night, while eating cold rice from a plastic bowl, he finally broke. He whispered into the empty room, Mama, I'm sorry. It wasn't a prayer. It was a confession. And as the tears came, he realized something he had forgotten long ago. The world doesn't forgive pride easily, but mothers do. Jason had built his life on arrogance and greed, forgetting that the higher pride lifts you, the harder you fall. But as the lights of the city dimmed outside his window, a small spark of humility returned. He didn't know it yet, but life wasn't punishing him, it was preparing him. Because sometimes you have to lose everything before you remember what truly matters. Time moved slowly in the village. Each morning arrived with the same sound of birds, the same soft wind that bent the crops, and the same heavy silence that hung around Grace's small mud house. Her strength was fading. Years of hard work had worn her body down, but it was not the tiredness of her hands that hurt most. It was the ache in her heart. Grace had given everything to her children. Her hands, once strong and calloused, had built their dreams, but now those hands trembled as she sat beside the small fire that barely warmed her. The yam on the fire cracked, the smoke stung her eyes, and she whispered to herself, if only I could see them again. She often walked to the old mango tree near her farm and sat under its shade. That tree had seen everything. Her laughter when the children were small, her tears the day they left for the city. Every time a car drove down the dusty village road, she would stand, hoping it was them. But each time, the vehicle passed without slowing. Still, she smiled and said quietly, maybe next time. Her neighbors pitied her. Some shook their heads. Those children forgot her, they said. She raised them alone, and now she suffers alone. But Grace never spoke ill of her children. They will come, she would say with calm faith. They just lost their way, for a while. One afternoon, while tending to her small farm, she suddenly felt dizzy. The hose slipped from her hand, and she fell onto the soil. The sun was hot, her breath shallow. A neighbor, Mama Ruth, saw her and ran over, calling for help. They carried Grace home and laid her on her bed. The local nurse came and said her body was weak, her heart tired. There was nothing much they could do. That night, the rain came heavily, beating against the old roof. Grace lay awake, her breathing slow. She stared at the ceiling, her mind filled with the faces of her children, Jason, Emily, and Mark. She wondered if they ever thought of her. She wondered if they were happy. Then, with trembling hands, she reached for the small wooden box beside her bed. Inside were her most precious things: an old rosary, a faded photograph of her children, and a pen with half its ink gone. She pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. "My dear children," she wrote slowly, her letters shaky. "I don't know where life has taken you, but I pray you are well. I am not angry that you left. Life in the city is hard, I understand. But sometimes, in chasing dreams, we forget the hands that first fed us." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she continued. "I forgive you, not because you asked, but because love is stronger than pain. Don't cry for me when I am gone. Instead, live well. Be kind. Help someone who cannot repay you. That is how you will love me, even when I am not here." She paused, catching her breath, then finished the letter. "Remember, children, life does not forget those who forget love, but it can heal those who remember mercy." When she was done, she folded the letter gently and placed it inside an old envelope. She looked toward the window where the rain had stopped and the moonlight streamed in. "Lord," she whispered, "if I don't see them again, please let them see this." By morning, Grace's breathing had grown faint. Mama Ruth sat by her side, praying softly. The dawn light filled the small room. Grace smiled, her lips barely moving. "Tell them I love them." Those were her final words before her eyes closed forever. The news spread quickly through the village. People came to help dig her grave behind the small church. There was no fancy coffin, no city visitors, no crowd. Only a handful of neighbors, a mound of red earth, and the quiet sound of birds singing above her resting place. After the burial, Mama Ruth entered Grace's room to tidy up. On the bed, she found the letter. She read it slowly, her tears falling onto the paper. Then she whispered, "They must see this, Grace. They must." The next morning, she walked to the small post office in the next town. Her back was bent, her steps slow, but she didn't stop. She mailed the letter to the addresses Grace had written years ago, not knowing if any of them were still the same. Weeks would pass before that letter found its way into the city, but when it did, it would carry more than words. It would carry a mother's heart, her forgiveness, her final breath, and the love that refused to die. Grace was gone, but her voice was still alive. And somewhere far away in the city, her children were about to hear it. The city lights glittered like jewels that night, but Emily felt no sparkle in her heart. She stood before a mirror in her lavish apartment, wearing a silver dress that shimmered under the chandelier. Everything about her life looked perfect, at least from the outside. Her fiancé, Daniel, was the son of a wealthy businessman. He adored her. To him, Emily was the picture of grace, class, and city elegance. She had told him she came from a respectable family, that her parents were traders who traveled abroad often. She spoke softly, dressed expensively, and carried herself like someone born into privilege. It was a lie she had repeated so many times, it had begun to feel like truth. She avoided questions about her hometown. When Daniel once asked to meet her mother, Emily smiled nervously and said, "She's not feeling well." Maybe after the wedding, deep inside, guilt lived like a quiet shadow, but she buried it beneath perfume and pretty words. Her friends envied her. The rich fiancé, the beautiful ring, the wedding coming soon. Emily had finally become what she always dreamed of, someone who never had to remember the dusty village or the hunger that once gnawed at her stomach. But the truth has a strange way of showing up, uninvited. One evening, Daniel took Emily to a dinner party at an exclusive hotel downtown. The hall was grand, marble floors, chandeliers like falling stars, men in tailored suits, women in satin gowns. The kind of place Emily used to dream of while washing plates in her mother's small kitchen. Everything was going perfectly until she heard a voice that froze her heart. "Emily? Emily Okoro? Is that you?" She turned slowly. Standing a few feet away was Mrs. Bissy, her old schoolteacher from the village. Grey-haired, smiling, completely unaware of the damage her words were about to cause. Daniel looked from Emily to the woman, surprised. "You know her?" Before Emily could stop it, the teacher continued cheerfully, "Ah, yes. She was one of the brightest girls in our little village school. Her mother used to bring me fresh cassava every harvest season. Such a humble woman." The world seemed to spin. The clinking of glasses faded, replaced by the pounding of Emily's heartbeat. The word village echoed in the air like a curse. Daniel's smile vanished. "Village?" he repeated slowly. "I thought your parents lived abroad." Emily tried to speak, but the words refused to come. She managed a weak laugh, but Daniel's eyes had already changed. They were no longer filled with love, only confusion, then anger. The rest of the evening was a blur. The teacher's smile faded as she sensed something was wrong. Daniel didn't say a word as they left the hall. When they reached the car, his voice was cold. "Why did you lie to me, Emily? Was I not enough to hear the truth?" Tears filled her eyes. "I was ashamed," she whispered. "I didn't want to lose you." Daniel shook his head. "You didn't lose me because you were poor. You lost me because you were not honest." He drove her home in silence. When she stepped out, he didn't follow. The door slammed, and with it, the dream life she had built came crashing down. The next morning, the news spread among her friends. Some sent pitying messages. Others laughed behind her back. In a city where reputation was currency, Emily had become broke overnight. She stayed indoors for days, her eyes swollen from crying. Every sound from the street felt like judgment. Her phone buzzed with messages she couldn't bear to read. The mirror that once showed her beauty now reflected her shame. As she sat by the window, staring at the rain outside, the gatekeeper knocked on her door. "Madam, a letter came for you," he said, handing her a brown envelope. It looked old, creased and stained, the handwriting shaky. She opened it slowly. Inside was her mother's letter. "My dear children," it began. "I don't know where life has taken you, but I pray you are well." Emily's hands trembled as she read every line. Each word sank deep into her chest. Forgiveness, love, mercy. The tears came freely now. She pressed the paper to her heart and whispered, "Oh, Mama, I'm so sorry." She read the final line again and again. Life does not forget those who forget love, but it can heal those who remember mercy. For the first time in years, Emily felt the walls of her pride crumble. The woman she had pretended to be disappeared, and the daughter her mother raised began to return. She sat on the floor, surrounded by silence, clutching that letter as though it were her mother's hand. Outside, the rain eased, and a soft beam of sunlight slipped through the clouds. Emily looked up through her tears and whispered, "Mama, I'll come home." It was not a promise made out of guilt. It was a cry from a broken heart, finding its way back to love. That night, for the first time in years, Emily slept in peace. Not because her life was fixed, but because the truth has set her free. The city had once bowed before Jason, its lights flashing in sync with his ambition. His name echoed through boardrooms, his smile was printed in magazines, and his phone never stopped ringing. To the world, Jason Thompson was a man who had made it. But beneath the sharp suits and shiny cars lived a man who had forgotten his beginning and his mother's prayers. It started with whispers in the office, tiny cracks in the glass tower of his success. A client questioned an invoice. A colleague hinted at missing funds, and soon the news spread like wildfire. Jason's signature was on everything. His pride had made him untouchable, or so he thought. The morning it broke, the sun seemed cruel. Reporters stood outside his company's gates, cameras flashing as Jason stepped out of his car. His boss wouldn't look him in the eye. "Jason, the auditors found discrepancies. You'll need to clear your desk." He laughed, a dry, broken sound. There must be a mistake. But deep down, he knew. The greed he once justified as just business had finally turned its face on him. By evening, his office was empty. His so-called friends vanished faster than the ink on his paychecks. Calls went unanswered. The same people who once bowed before him crossed the street to avoid him. In the quiet that followed, Jason realized how small the city could be when you had no one. He tried to stay strong, booked into a hotel, promised himself it was temporary. But money burns fast when pride refuses to bend. Weeks turned into months. He sold his car, then his watch, then, piece by piece, his pride. The man who once laughed at his mother's frugality now counted coins for a meal. One night, under the dim light of a roadside cafe, Jason sat alone with a half-eaten sandwich. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes hollow. The rain outside tapped gently against the glass, a lonely rhythm that matched his heartbeat. An old man sat across from him, watching silently. His clothes were worn but clean, his eyes gentle. After a long silence, the old man spoke. "Pride is a good coat, my son, but it won't keep you warm forever." Jason looked up, startled. "Do I know you?" The man smiled faintly. "No, but I know that look in your eyes. I once had it too." They spoke for hours. The stranger shared stories of loss and redemption, of how he'd hurt those who loved him and how forgiveness had saved his soul. Jason listened quietly, tears welling as he heard echoes of his mother's voice in every word. "Forgiveness," the man said softly, "isn't for the person who wronged you. It's for your heart, so it can breathe again." When Jason left that night, the streets were wet, reflecting the city's neon lights. But something in him had shifted. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of being important. He just felt human. Later that week, he tried to reach his siblings, but their numbers had changed. His pride had burned every bridge. Alone, he walked through the city's noise, clutching a crumpled photo of his mother, the one he once hid in his wallet. Her smile pierced through the shadows like a light that refused to fade. He stood under a street lamp and whispered, "Mama, I'm sorry." The words felt like a wound and a cure all at once. The wind brushed against his face, gentle, almost like a touch. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he could almost hear her voice. "My son." come home. Jason didn't know then that home would no longer be the same. But in that quiet night, for the first time in a long time, he took the first step toward it. The years had carved deep lines of silence between them, but pain has a way of making lost souls find one another again. Jason had been living day by day, working small jobs, learning to be invisible. Emily had stopped attending social events and moved to a smaller apartment. Their younger brother, Mark, who once dreamed of being an engineer, had dropped out of school after their mother's support stopped. They all lived in different corners of the city, each swallowed by their own regrets, until one day a single envelope tied them together. It was a letter from their late mother, forwarded through the neighbor who'd found their addresses. Jason read it first, then Emily, then Mark. The handwriting was weak, but the words were stronger than time. My children, if this reaches you, don't let shame keep you apart. The world will forget you when you fall, but your family won't. Come home when you can. There's peace waiting where love never dies. The words broke something inside them, something pride had built years ago. That night, Jason called Emily. Neither spoke at first. Only silence and breathing filled the line. Finally, she whispered, I miss her. Jason swallowed hard. We all do. Let's go home. The journey began before dawn. 3 buses, countless stairs, and endless miles of red earth roads later, the city's noise faded behind them. For the first time in years, they rode side by side, the hum of the engine mixing with the sound of rain tapping against the windows. None of them spoke much. There were no words strong enough to undo the years. As they neared their village, familiar sights appeared. The crooked palm tree by the old well, the narrow path lined with cassava plants, the smell of wet earth after rain. Emily pressed her forehead against the window, tears falling freely now. She used to stand there, she whispered. Every time we came home, she'd wait right there. But this time, no one waited. When they arrived, the house was quieter than a grave. The once blue paint had faded into grey, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. An old neighbor, Mama Grace, came out slowly with a walking stick in hand. Her face softened when she saw them. You've come back, she said, voice trembling. But you're late. Emily fell to her knees before the words could sink in. Jason's chest tightened, his breath caught in his throat. Mark covered his face and wept. Mama Grace led them behind the house to the small mound of earth covered in fresh flowers, their mother's grave. For a long time, no one spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath with them. Emily reached out, touching the grave with shaking hands. Jason knelt beside her, his tears falling freely into the soil. I thought I had time, he whispered. I thought I could make things right. Mama Grace stood behind them, watching quietly. She prayed for you until the last day, she said softly. She said you'd come home, even if she didn't live to see it. The sun began to set, casting golden light across the small yard. Birds flew low, and the wind carried the smell of rain. Emily leaned against Jason's shoulder, clutching the letter. We left her poor, she said through tears, but she never left us empty. Jason closed his eyes and felt the weight of every mistake, the lost years, the pride, the silence. But beneath all that pain, something else began to rise. Not hope, not yet, but forgiveness, quiet and patient, like the soil beneath their feet. That night, as they sat under the stars beside the grave, Mark whispered, maybe she still sees us. Maybe she knows we came back. Jason nodded slowly. She does. She always did. The crickets sang softly in the distance. For the first time in years, they slept not in comfort, but in peace. The city's noise was gone, replaced by the whisper of home, a home they had lost but finally returned to, even if it was too late to say goodbye. Morning broke softly over the village, the kind of dawn that carried both peace and sorrow. The air was heavy with dew, and the sound of birds filled the silence that had lingered all night. The siblings sat outside their mother's old house, eyes red from weeping, hearts still raw from what they had seen. Emily held the envelope gently, as if afraid it might break. The edges were worn, the paper thin from years of being handled by love. Jason and Mark sat beside her, both silent. None of them wanted to open it, because reading her words would mean accepting she was truly gone. But finally, Emily tore it open. The handwriting trembled, uneven, but every line carried her warmth. My dear children, if you are reading this, it means I've gone where pain can't reach me. Don't cry for me. I've had a full life, even in my little farm. Every time I planted a seed, I thought of you. Every time I ate, I prayed you were full too. I know life in the city is hard. I know you left to find something better. I never blamed you for going, only for forgetting that love is the only thing that grows when shared. I have forgiven you already, before you even asked. Because a mother's heart doesn't count wrongs. It remembers laughter, first steps, and the sound of her children coming home. If guilt follows you, let it lead you to kindness. If pride finds you again, let it remind you that money is nothing without peace. I want you to live, to love, and to help others who feel forgotten. That way, you will find me again, not in the grave, but in every act of love you give. Your mother, Mary. Emily couldn't finish before breaking down. Her voice cracked, her hands shook. Jason reached for the letter, reading the rest aloud through his own tears. The words fell like rain over their wounds. Every sentence felt like her arms around them, warm, forgiving, unshakable. Mark stared at the ground, his voice barely a whisper. She forgave us before we even came back. Jason nodded slowly. She always did. We were too blind to see it. The wind rustled the leaves nearby, almost as if the earth itself was breathing with them. Emily folded the letter carefully and placed it on the small wooden table beside her mother's old Bible. We can't stay stuck in regret, she said softly. She wanted us to live differently. For the first time in years, Jason smiled faintly. It wasn't the confident grin of the man who once owned the city. It was quiet, humble, and real. We'll honor her, he said. Not with tears, but with something good. Mark looked up at his older brother. What do we do now? Jason turned his gaze toward the fields behind the house, the same ones their mother had tended alone. We start from where she stopped. The sky had brightened now, golden rays touching the fields and the small grave nearby. The pain was still there, but it no longer felt like punishment. It felt like a lesson, a reminder that forgiveness wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one. That day, as they worked together, cleaning the yard, repairing the house, and clearing weeds from her grave, they felt her presence everywhere, in the soft wind, in the quiet peace that settled over them, in the faint scent of her favorite flowers. They had lost everything the world could offer, but in her last letter, their mother gave them something far greater: peace, purpose, and a love that refused to die. The air in Mary's old home felt different now, peaceful, like the walls themselves had finally exhaled after years of silent grief. Jason, Emily, and Mark stayed behind, cleaning the compound, repainting the wooden door, and planting new flowers by their mother's grave. Days turned into weeks. The neighbors began visiting again, each with stories about Mary, how she had shared her last meal with a hungry child, how she nursed sick elders when no one else would, how she prayed for her children every night, even after they left. Each story pierced their hearts deeper than any sermon could. Jason would sit under the mango tree she planted and stare at the horizon for hours. "I thought success was leaving here," he murmured one evening, his voice low. "But I realize home was what I was running from." Emily nodded, folding her arms tightly around herself. She gave everything, and we gave her silence. Mark's eyes filled. "Maybe we can give something back now." That night, they lit a small lamp inside the house and wrote down an idea on a torn notebook. The Mary Foundation, helping single mothers rise. At first, it sounded too big for them. 3 broken siblings with nothing but guilt and a name. But Mary had left them more than memories. She had left them her spirit. They began with what they had: a few clothes, a portion of the farmland, and stories of her kindness. They sold part of the harvest and used the money to buy food and school books for 2 struggling mothers in the nearby village. The women cried, thanking them through trembling lips. Emily smiled through her tears. "If Mama could feed strangers with nothing, we can too, even with little." Word spread quickly. People remembered Mary. Soon, local traders, pastors, and even the village chief began contributing. Jason returned to the city, not to chase wealth, but to find sponsors who believed in giving back. He stood in front of investors, speaking from his heart, not from pride. "My mother was poor," he said, voice breaking, "but she was the richest woman I ever knew, because she never stopped giving." Back home, Emily organized women into farming groups, teaching them to grow vegetables and earn income. Mark, once the quiet one, became the storyteller. He traveled around nearby towns, sharing their mother's story, not one of pity, but of power, faith, and forgiveness. Months passed, and the foundation grew. A small office was built near the marketplace, painted bright yellow, with Mary's old photograph framed at the entrance. Her smile seemed to welcome every woman who stepped in. One afternoon, an old man arrived with a cane and a cracked smile. "I remember her," he said, pointing to the photo. "When my wife was dying, she brought soup every day until the end." Emily's voice trembled. "Did she ever tell you why?" He chuckled softly. "She said, 'Love is the only debt worth owing.'" The words lingered like a blessing. That evening, the siblings gathered around their mother's grave again. Lanterns flickered. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. Jason knelt down and whispered, "Mama, your name is no longer buried." "It lives again." Emily placed fresh flowers beside the headstone. "We'll keep giving until others feel what you gave us." Mark closed his eyes. "And maybe you'll smile wherever you are." The wind rose gently, moving the leaves in soft circles, almost like an answer. They felt her presence, not in sorrow, but in light. From that day, every woman they helped, every child they fed, and every field they replanted carried the mark of her love. The Mary Foundation became more than a project. It became redemption in motion, a mother's heart beating through her children at last. Years passed, but the memory of Mary never faded. Her house, once a lonely shell, had become the beating heart of the community, a place where stories of hope were born and carried across the villages. The Mary Foundation had grown beyond what any of them imagined. What began with a notebook and a prayer had become a beacon for struggling mothers across the region. Each wall in the small yellow office now carried framed photos, women smiling with their children, farmlands thriving again, classrooms full of laughter. Jason sat behind his desk, looking at the Foundation's yearly report. He wasn't thinking about the numbers, only the faces behind them. Every figure represented a story, every success a whisper from his mother. He leaned back, smiling faintly. "We finally did it, Mama," he murmured. Outside, Emily was speaking to a group of women, showing them how to manage small businesses. Her laughter filled the air, the kind her mother used to have, light and contagious. Mark stood nearby, filming the moment for their next community outreach video. "People need to see what love can rebuild," he said softly. That evening, as the sun began to set, the siblings gathered by their mother's grave like they always did at the end of each year. The fields were greener than ever, the sky painted in soft gold and crimson. Jason placed a bouquet of fresh white lilies on the grave. Emily knelt and brushed off the dust from the headstone, while Mark lit a small candle beside them. "Remember when we used to think success was owning cars and houses?" Jason said, half laughing, half teary. Emily nodded. "Now success means one less hungry child, one mother smiling again," Mark whispered. "And one promise kept." A soft wind blew through the trees, and for a moment they felt her all, Mary, the same warmth that once filled their small kitchen, the same voice that called them in for dinner, the same spirit that refused to fade. Then, as they turned to leave, a small girl, no older than 7, came running toward them. She wore a bright dress and held a worn notebook to her chest. "Uncle Jason!" "Auntie Emily," she called joyfully. Her smile, wide, pure, and innocent, stopped them in their tracks. Emily knelt and smiled. "Hey, little one, what's that you're holding?" The girl opened the notebook. On the first page was written, "Dreams of a Better Tomorrow," inspired by the Mary Foundation. Jason's eyes softened. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Mary," she said brightly. They froze. Emily's lips trembled. "Who named you that?" "My mother," the girl answered. "She said she named me after a woman who helped her when no one else did." The world seemed to pause around them. The sunset shimmered brighter. The candle flame near the grave flickered higher, and something inside their hearts broke open, not in pain, but in peace. Emily hugged the girl tightly. Jason looked up at the sky, eyes wet but smiling. Mark lifted his camera, hands shaking, and whispered, "Let's keep her name alive, forever." Years later, the foundation expanded into cities and schools. Scholarships were named after Mary, and children across the country grew up knowing her story. Jason became a mentor to young men, teaching humility. Emily turned her focus to women's leadership, ensuring no mother ever felt forgotten. Mark produced a documentary about their journey, titled "A Mother's Love Never Dies." And through it all, they carried one truth that echoed through every life they touched. Poverty had taken their comfort, pride had stolen their peace, but forgiveness had given them everything back. On the Foundation's 10th anniversary, as the community gathered to celebrate, Jason stood before the crowd with his siblings beside him. He looked at the banner that read, "The Mary Foundation, where love still lives." Then he smiled and said softly into the microphone, "Life didn't forget us, because we finally remembered what truly mattered. The crowd cheered, music filled the air, and for the first time in a long time, the siblings didn't feel guilt or regret, only gratitude. The camera of life panned out one last time, the foundation glowing in golden light, the siblings standing together, and the little girl, Mary, running through the field, laughter echoing like a song carried by the wind. And somewhere, unseen but felt, their mother smiled. No money could replace the love she gave. No success could erase the guilt they carried. But in the end, her forgiveness showed them that a mother's heart never forgets, and neither should we. Tell us, what would you do if you were in their place? If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification button so you never miss out on our latest intriguing stories. Thanks for watching.